On my way to pick up my acceptance letter from Peking University, my life took a tragic turn. A car hit me, and the driver, instead of helping, stepped on the gas and ran over me. Just like that, my life ended as abruptly as it had begun. I had just turned 18. In the last fleeting moments before I lost consciousness, my gaze fixed on the familiar, menacing face of the driver.
Humph. Did you really think that if you didn't give me the acceptance letter, I wouldn't find another way?
Emily's words echoed in my ears as she turned to my father, John.
Dad, let's go quickly before someone sees us.
Blood gushed from my mouth as I unwillingly watched them flee. John. Emily. Even in death, I won't let you get away with this. My father, John, known as the quiz master of the town, fell in love with my mother during their university days. After graduation, my mother sold my grandfather's house to fund their joint business venture. When they achieved some success, my mother became pregnant, and John took the opportunity to have an affair with a supplier's representative, Rachel. My grandmother mocked my mother, saying,
"Miss Rachel is beautiful and capable, and she can help my son. You should be sensible and take your worthless child and leave my house."
Thus, my mother and I were thrown out. When I was 7, my mother succumbed to the harsh winter, leaving me alone. I was then sent to an orphanage. From that day on, I poured all my energy into my studies, eventually earning a place at Peking University. My father, who had always ignored me, visited once, only to ask me to give my acceptance letter to Emily and take her place at a third-rate college.
You should let Emily go to Peking University instead. She deserves it more.
After I repeatedly refused, I met my untimely end. John, known as the small-town scholar, fell in love with my mother during college. After graduation, my mother sold my grandfather's house to fund their startup. When they achieved some success, he had an affair with Rachel, a supplier's sales representative, while my mother was expecting me. My grandmother mocked my mother, saying,
"Miss Rachel is beautiful and capable, and she can help my son. You better know your place and take your worthless daughter and get out of my house."
And so, my mother and I were thrown out. In a quiet afternoon, John arrived to take care of me. I began to act peculiarly.
"Don't come near me. Get away, or I'll have my dad deal with you."
I started convulsing, my body shaking uncontrollably while uttering eerie, unclear syllables. Rachel and John were petrified. They called for the doctor, but he found nothing wrong.
Could she be possessed? Honey, go call that fortune teller.
Later that evening, a man in Western-style sunglasses and traditional Chinese attire entered the hospital room, chanting unknown incantations.
Your daughter has been disturbed by malevolent spirits and needs immediate exorcism. She is a dragon. Do you have any tigers in your family? A clash between a dragon and a tiger can be dangerous.
I'm a dragon. Why haven't I clashed with her before?
Your pregnancy altered your fate. Mrs. Rachel, if you don't want to be separated from your daughter, invite an elder relative to stay at your home, ideally someone born in the year of the ox. This ensures family harmony and prosperity. Act quickly, or it might affect the unborn child.
My grandmother was born in the year of the ox. My father, impressed by the fortune teller's accuracy, was anxious about the potential harm to the unborn child and wanted to bring my grandmother over immediately. Rachel was adamant about not living with my grandmother. Despite my grandmother's earlier praise of Rachel, years had passed, and their strong-willed natures had caused them to fall out. My grandmother had returned to her hometown.
Rachel, we can buy you a house in the city center. That way, you won't have to live with my mother.
All right, but it must be a nice house.
Dad, let's do it this weekend. I'm free then, and I can help pick up grandmother.
Rachel, lost in her dreams of the new house John promised, was unaware I had already contacted the fortune teller using her phone. According to our agreement, he would block Rachel's WeChat, and I would pay him the remaining amount. After being discharged from the hospital, the housekeeper, under Rachel's orders, prepared a lavish meal for Mia. There was chicken, duck, fish, and an array of delicacies. Thoughts of her mother plagued Mia's mind, and she couldn't bring herself to eat.
I wonder if they ever think about my mother and me, especially when they're dining so lavishly.
Mia remembered her past life, her mother working as a cashier in a supermarket while she was home alone, living on instant noodles and water with floating white powder. Meanwhile, John and Rachel lived comfortably, with even their napkins being more expensive than her mother's daily wage. Mia decided to take action. She added some hawthorn powder to Rachel's soup. Not long after eating, Rachel began feeling nauseous. In the afternoon, when they went to the station to pick up grandmother, Rachel stayed behind, citing her illness.
It's been so long since we last met, and she doesn't even come to pick me up. What kind of attitude is that? Is this the good daughter-in-law you told me about? If she weren't carrying a boy, I'd give her a piece of my mind.
Mom, she wanted to come, but she ate something bad and isn't feeling well. It's not intentional.
Yes, grandmother, my mother was fine this morning, but she suddenly felt unwell in the afternoon. I'm really worried about her.
Grandmother snorted, her face darkening.
She's probably avoiding me. The young lady from a wealthy family looks down on me, an old woman from the countryside. This illness must be fake, trying to show me who's boss. Even if it's real, she's still irresponsible, eating recklessly while carrying my grandson.
John shook his head helplessly and said no more. When they got home, Rachel was resting in her room due to her discomfort. Grandmother, not one to tolerate such behavior, kicked open the door and turned on the light, the strong light shining on Rachel's pale, panicked face.
Get up, Rachel! You think you can avoid me by pretending to be sick?
Mother, I really don't feel well.
Nonsense! You're just being irresponsible. You're carrying my grandson. You should be more careful.
Mom, please calm down. Rachel is really unwell. Let's give her some time to rest.
Grandmother left the room in a huff, leaving John and Rachel in uneasy silence. My father, John, known as the small-town scholar, fell in love with my mother during their university days. After graduation, my mother sold her father's house to fund their joint venture. They saw some success, but John betrayed my mother with Rachel, a sales representative from their supplier, while my mother was expecting me.
Miss Rachel is beautiful and capable, and she can help my son. You should be sensible and take your worthless child and leave my house.
Thus, my mother and I were thrown out. When I was 7, my mother succumbed to the cold winter, and I was sent to an orphanage. From then on, I devoted all my time to studying. When I was accepted into Peking University, my so-called father visited me for the first time.
Give your acceptance letter to Emily. She deserves to go to Peking University. You can take her place at the third-rate college she got into.
After repeatedly refusing, I passed away. Rachel never expected John to raise his hand against her.
John, how dare you hit me?
You started by insulting my mother.
Rachel, clutching her face, sat down heavily on a nearby chair.
But your mother falsely accused me first. John, I'm carrying your son, and you treat me like this. Do you even want this child? If not, I'll just get rid of it.
Rachel knew John's weak spot well.
No, Rachel, I was wrong. I acted impulsively. Please don't do anything rash. Didn't you want that bag last time? I'll buy it for you as compensation.
Only then did Rachel's expression improve. This matter finally ended after John made a significant concession. However, even after grandmother was discharged from the hospital, her relationship with Rachel remained tense. After several heated arguments, John couldn't take it anymore and sent grandmother back to her hometown. Not long after, John received a phone call. I stood beside him, listening to the voice on the other end, feeling a bit excited. I was finally being sent over. In my previous life, it was also around this time that my mother fell ill. To prevent me from starving with her, she set aside her pride and sent me to John's house. The next morning, I saw me at the doorstep. It was my original self. She looked gloomy, her eyes cast downward, but I knew she was secretly observing me and the house.
Dad, Mom.
Naturally, John and Rachel didn't welcome her. She received over 20 disdainful looks in just one morning. After all, her presence was only for the sake of John's son. Fortunately, in my youthful innocence, I took her hand and led her to my room.
Dad said you're my sister, but why have I never seen you before? By the way, your mom isn't my mom. Where is your mom?
She bit her lip, her voice choked with sobs.
What does it have to do with you?
Unable to hide her resentment, as I was just a few years old then. Looking back, in this villa, John didn't initially treat me harshly. It was only later, under Rachel and Emily's instigation, that his attitude towards me worsened. I tried to hold her hand, but she shook it off.
Sister, I know what you're thinking, and I know you don't trust me. But I want to tell you, only by enduring and pleasing Dad can you achieve what you want.
She looked up, her gaze changing, as if a hard defense line had been breached. Finally, she bit her lip and stubbornly turned her head.
Don't pretend to be kind.
It seemed that gentle persuasion wouldn't work. I withdrew my hand and scoffed.
What are you proud of? Your mother can't even afford medicine. All her salary goes to buying food for you. If you're so capable, buy the medicine yourself.
Her face turned red, and her tearful expression made my heart ache. But she didn't disappoint me. Under my persuasion, I learned that my mother wasn't gone. But she had been hit by a car and was seriously injured, unable to work and without money. So I had no choice but to come to John's house for help. Now, under my provocation, she gritted her teeth and made up her mind.
I'll buy it. From now on, I'll save money to buy medicine for Mom.
If you're going to buy from a big hospital. Don't go to those cheap, low-quality clinics. Then I might respect you a bit more.
She glared at me angrily.
Fine.
My father, John, known as the small-town scholar, fell in love with my mother during college. After graduation, my mother sold my grandfather's house to fund their startup. When they achieved some success, he cheated on her with Rachel, a supplier's sales representative, while my mother was expecting me. My grandmother even mocked my mother, saying,
Miss Rachel is beautiful and capable, and she can help my son. You better know your place and take your worthless daughter and get out of my house.
And so, my mother and I were thrown out. When I was 7, my mother succumbed to the harsh winter, and I was sent to an orphanage. From then on, I spent all my time studying until I got into Peking University. My father, who had always ignored me, visited me once, only to ask me to give my acceptance letter to Emily and take her place at a third-rate college she had been accepted to.
You need to give your acceptance letter to Emily. She deserves it more.
After I refused repeatedly, I met my end. I offered her some medicine, but she swatted it away.
I don't need your charity.
She clutched the blanket, refusing to look at me. Through the sliver of light from the doorway, I could see her pale face and her eyelids struggling to stay open. It seemed as if she might faint at any moment. I felt uneasy, praying she would hold on and that John would return soon. I picked up the medicine and placed it on her bedside table. Before leaving, I secretly installed a pinhole camera by her bed. After stepping out, I installed another camera in the living room and called grandmother.
Oh, it's you. How's my precious grandson?
As always, her focus was on her precious grandson. In 3 sentences, she couldn't stop talking about Rachel's pregnancy.
Mommy? She's doing well. By the way, grandmother, she seems to really like sour foods. Could you send some of those sour oranges from home? She's carrying that big belly around every day. It's so hard for her.
Sure enough, grandmother, who firmly believed in old wives' tales, shrieked.
What did you say? Are you sure she wants sour foods and has a round belly?
Yes.
Before hanging up, I heard her cursing on the other end.
That little liar! She dared to tell me it's a boy. It's clearly another girl.
Late at night, John finally returned from the company, looking displeased. It seemed grandmother's call had annoyed him. He casually tossed his clothes onto the sofa, lit a cigarette, and frowned at his laptop screen.
Daddy, play with me.
Though impatient, he patted my head.
Be good. Daddy's busy now. Ask Mommy to play with you.
But after Mommy's checkup this afternoon, she went to Grandma's and hasn't come back yet.
To get rid of me quickly, he rubbed his temples.
Where's Mia? Ask her to play with you and be nicer to you. If you're unhappy about anything, come to Daddy. Daddy will take care of it.
His blatant favoritism no longer hurt me. I was used to it.
But Mia is sick. When I went to her room earlier, she seemed to have stopped breathing.
What?
He hurried to Mia's room, and I followed, accidentally knocking over a drink on the table, which he didn't notice. Seeing the weak girl struggling to breathe on the bed, his face filled with panic.
What happened?
I pretended to be scared, sitting on the floor and crying.
Daddy, Mommy told me not to tell you.
Speak.
Like any ordinary child, seemingly unable to bear the fright, I sobbed.
Mommy always hits Mia. It's happened many times. This time, it seems she hit too hard, and Mia hasn't woken up.
John rushed Mia to the hospital. My father, John, known as the small-town scholar, fell in love with my mother during college.
John, I believe in us. I sold my father's house to fund our startup. We'll make it together.
When they achieved some success, John cheated on her with Rachel, a supplier's sales representative, while my mother was expecting me.
Miss Rachel is beautiful and capable, and she can help my son. You better know your place and take your worthless daughter and get out of my house.
And so, my mother and I were thrown out. When I was 7, my mother passed away during winter, and I was sent to an orphanage. From then on, I devoted all my time to studying until I got into Peking University.
You should give your acceptance letter to Emily and take her place at the third-rate college she got into.
After I refused repeatedly, I met my end. As the months went by, Rachel had a severe fall. Not only did she lose the baby, but she also narrowly escaped a life-threatening situation, leaving her unable to have children in the future.
It was a male fetus.
John cried his heart out by Rachel's bedside.
Why did this happen to us?
Afterward, John frequently visited the hospital, but Rachel never forgave him.
Stay away from me, John.
After being discharged, Rachel stayed at her parents' home for a few months. Even when she returned, she often mocked John.
You're useless, John.
They both became consumed by their issues, neglecting Mia and me. Slowly, a year or two passed. The faint guilt John felt gradually faded with Rachel's continuous cold remarks. Mia got a brief respite, and her grades were always top of the class. It wasn't until 6th grade that Rachel noticed Mia's outstanding performance. Under her insistence, Mia was sent to live with my mother. Since my mother changed her medication, her health, though not great, was no longer life-threatening. On the day she passed away in my previous life, I secretly watched over her from a tall tree in that small alley. Over the years, Mia had grown a lot, and I believed she could protect my mother. In my 3rd year of middle school, relying on my past life's memories, I went to that small alley. Around 8 p.m., a beautiful and striking woman appeared at the alley's entrance. She carried a designer bag, chewed gum, and walked with a confident, almost arrogant stride. In my previous life, Jessica was a well-known gold digger near the rental house where my mother and I lived. She lived in a drafty house but always wore designer clothes when she went out. There were many rumors, but they all pointed to one thing: relying on men. I blocked her path and stared at her intently.
Little girl, why are you blocking my way?
I asked her, "Do you want a lifetime supply of designer bags?"
I only know how to please men, not little girls.
I looked her up and down and shook my head. You need a makeover first. John, often referred to as the small-town scholar, fell deeply in love with my mother during their college years. After they graduated, my mother sold my grandfather's house to fund their startup. Achieving some success, John betrayed her with Rachel, a supplier's sales representative, while my mother was expecting me.
Miss Rachel is beautiful and capable, and she can help my son. You better know your place and take your worthless daughter and get out of my house.
And so, my mother and I were thrown out. When I was 7, my mother succumbed to the harsh winter, and I was sent to an orphanage. From then on, I focused on my studies until I was accepted into Peking University. My father, who had always ignored me, visited me once, only to ask for my acceptance letter to give to Emily, so she could take my place at a third-rate college she had been accepted to.
I need you to give your acceptance letter to Emily and take her place at the third-rate college.
After I refused repeatedly, I passed away. Afterwards, John's company suddenly opened a branch in our hometown, County B, and he went on a business trip there for several months. When he returned, he rarely came home and stayed elsewhere.
Why won't you come home, John? Are you avoiding me?
Rachel was in a state of hysteria, and even towards me, her biological daughter, she was either hitting or scolding. Fortunately, I started living at school during my senior year of high school, so I rarely saw her. My 3 years of high school were far from ordinary. I was seen as a bad student by all the teachers because John had paid to get me into the school, and my grades were not ideal.
Why can't you be more like Emily? She's a model student.
I constantly skipped classes and talked back to teachers, but with John's investment, they didn't dare to do much to me. During the time I skipped classes, I used my memories from my past life to visit the small shops where my mother had worked, providing her with significant financial help through various discreet methods. Fortunately, my mother was not just a housewife with no skills. When she no longer had to worry about making a living and when Rachel and John no longer had the energy to target her, she accepted a job offer from a large company without hesitation. Over the years, her situation improved significantly. I secretly visited her once. She was radiant, dressed in a new professional outfit, with exquisite makeup, exuding confidence as she spoke under the towering buildings. At that moment, tears welled up in my eyes, and I felt at peace. After the college entrance exams, on the day the results were released, I returned home to witness a dramatic scene.
Alex, it's all my fault. I'm sorry. I shouldn't have agreed to your mother's request. I didn't know you had a wife. I'm sorry, I'll leave now.
Jessica carefully stood up, tears welling in her eyes, and gently touched her slightly swollen belly.
Don't be afraid, Jessica. It's my fault for hiding the fact that my son was married. But I really like this child of yours, and so does my son. Now that you're carrying our family's child, I won't treat you harshly.
Then, grandmother turned sharply to Rachel, her eyes filled with malice, and pointed a finger at her nose.
You wretched woman! You've been married into our family for years and haven't given birth to a single son. You're like a hen that doesn't lay eggs. Today, I'm kicking you out.
You old hag. When you drove Sophia away, I knew you were no good. She helped John build and expand the company, but she was foolish, never guarded against you, and let you drive her and her newborn daughter away without giving her a penny. Don't think I'm as stupid as that woman. You can't kick me out. Even if we part ways, I'll take half of the family's assets. When your son's company needed funds, you didn't say I was a hen that didn't lay eggs. Now you're discarding me like a used tool. I'm telling you, you will face retribution. Your family will be cursed.
Grandmother's face turned green with rage. John, unable to bear it any longer, slapped Rachel hard.
Get out! You're not even fit to eat the food in my house. If you don't leave, I'll make sure you regret it.
Rachel's eyes turned bloodshot, and she grabbed a vase from the table, aiming it at Jessica's belly.
All of you, get out of my life!
John quickly shielded Jessica. Then, with a chilling look in his eyes, the temperature in the room seemed to drop by several degrees. His expression was as cold as a demon from hell. He strode over to Rachel and kicked her hard, causing her to scream in agony.
Ah!
Rachel fell to the ground, foaming at the mouth and convulsing. Grandmother, still not satisfied, came over and slapped and kicked her, cursing.
How dare you curse my grandson? You wretched woman!
John, also enraged, not only slapped her face until it bled but also kicked her head around like a football. They were so engrossed in the beating that they only turned their heads when they heard the sound of cameras clicking. Behind me was a group of excited reporters, frantically capturing the scene that would make them famous.
Emily! Why did you bring reporters here?
Mia is the top scorer in the province. The reporters wanted to interview Dad, so I brought them over.
When Rachel was taken to the hospital, John and my grandmother were taken to the police station for intentional harm. Within half an hour, the news in City A was dominated by two names. Heartbreaking. The untold story of our city's top student, Mia. Despite her broken family, she has achieved such brilliance. John, chairman of the John Group, suspected of abandoning his wife and child. Behind the glamour lies the darkness of human nature. Modern-day chin shimmy. John, a ruthless man living off a woman. Over the years, I had gathered a lot of information. Besides Rachel's blatant talk about abandoning his wife and child, there were many details about how he deceived my mother and juggled multiple relationships.
They even withheld my mother's salary, leaving us hungry for days.
I reported these basic facts to the media. The most crucial evidence was the chat records between Rachel and Dr. Smith, which I released on a popular short video platform. In the records, they shamelessly discussed switching my mother's medication to something that would cause long-term kidney failure, ultimately leading to her passing, so Rachel could be worry-free. There were also several videos of Rachel mistreating me at home, scenes so shocking that even after experiencing death once, I couldn't help but shed tears watching them again. Soon, the videos garnered billions of views, with a flood of angry comments below.
This stepmother is too vicious. How could she harm such a young child? No, she's not a stepmother. She's just a homewrecker. Stealing someone's husband wasn't enough. She had to commit such heinous acts. It's the greatest injustice that such people exist in this world.
Stealing a husband? A man who built his fortune off a woman and then abandoned his wife. I wouldn't even look at such a man if he were in the trash. These two are a disgrace to humanity. Enough said. I'm just waiting for the law to bring justice to Mia and her mother.
People tagged the cyber police, and soon, officers went to my mother's house. At night, I sat in the empty villa, on the swing on the balcony, looking out at the tranquil darkness. I felt so weak that even opening my eyes was an effort.
This was probably the most I could do.
These days, my health had been deteriorating. I felt that I might leave this world at any moment. The situation had escalated, and neither Mia, Rachel, nor Dr. Smith could escape the law's grasp.
As for the John group, it would be left to my mother and my original self.
So tired. I closed my eyes, unable to hold on any longer, my breath becoming so faint that I could barely feel it. I woke up again. This time, it was in a hospital bed. I propped myself up and picked up the phone beside me, staring at the familiar face on the screen. I was stunned. My soul had returned to my body. Looking at the date, I suddenly realized. If I wasn't mistaken, today was the day I was supposed to collect my acceptance letter from Peking University. My heart sank. Could it all have been just a dream? When my mother, dressed in her professional attire, stood in front of me, I couldn't help but cry. It was all real. She looked at me lovingly, walked over, touched my forehead, and sighed in relief.
Mia, it's good that you're okay. You were hit by a car while collecting your acceptance letter. Fortunately, it was just a concussion, nothing serious.
Mom, what about John and Rachel?
My mother pressed her lips together, a cold glint flashing in her eyes.
Rachel is still in the hospital, and John has been detained. I've explained everything to the police over the years. Don't worry, justice will be served.
I hugged my mother, crying uncontrollably. It was such a relief. After recovering for a while, I was discharged from the hospital. During this time, my mother continued working, while I prepared to move to the capital.
Mia, Rachel's health deteriorated after a complication, and John's action hit a vital spot. She struggled for months in the hospital before passing away.
I felt nothing. Because I had always known this day would come for her. The day before I left for the capital, my mother and I went to court. I hadn't seen John in months. He had lost a lot of weight, with dark circles under his eyes and a bruised face. In court, he confessed to everything he had done, not out of guilt, but because he knew that denying it would lead to harsher punishment. In the end, he was sentenced for his actions, while Dr. Smith received a 7-year prison sentence. At that moment, John was more panicked than ever. I saw shock, fear, and a hint of regret in his eyes. He was so scared that he lost control and fainted, only to be dragged out by the police. That night, I went to see him.
Mia, I'm sorry, but as your father, can I ask you for one favor?
What is it?
Can you find a woman named Jessica and take care of her, help her with the baby?
I laughed, clutching my stomach until tears streamed down my face. Even at the end, he was thinking about his son.
Sure, I know Jessica is carrying your son, but how should I take care of her?
I can give you my company, as long as you take care of my son.
All right.
He made a will, leaving 80% of his shares to me. The remaining 20% went to the unborn child Jessica was supposedly carrying. I took the will and left. He probably never had the chance to find out. Jessica wasn't expecting, she had only wrapped some padding around her stomach. Her report was fake. There was no child. The John family line would end with him. From now on, I would hand over the John Group to my mother, renaming it the Sophia Group. After all, the company was started with the money from selling my grandfather's house. Returning it to my mother was a way to honor both her and my grandfather. As for me, I would now be known as Mia Sophia. And John? I would use the money he gave me to ensure he experienced unparalleled joy in prison. After all, he was my father, he couldn't leave too comfortably, could he? Later, I received a letter from the prison. I heard that he often had his bones broken. I heard that John's family background was exposed, and many people went to his old home, vandalizing and cursing in front of my grandmother's house. The old lady, who already had heart problems, passed away one morning. But none of it mattered to me anymore. I boarded the